So the question today is, after you've ended your story, how do you begin the next one? That's the question we're going to discuss today on reality coaching for writers. Diana, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey,
Good to have you
good
here.
to see you. Good to see you, Eddie.
Yeah, so I was telling you before we came on that this thought came to me, and I guess it's probably because we're in the Advent season. And just let me see if I can do this. So there, Benny
Oh,
already.
how beautiful.
She doesn't have the
Gorgeous.
ornaments on it yet, but Benny's got the tree up. She's really every year eager to get this in the stand and done. So we're in that time, that season of the year, and if you think about it, Advent is really a very short season during the year. I
Hmm.
mean, it's only 4 weeks, right? In 1 month. And I'm not a math person, so I can't do the ratio, but that's a small portion of a whole year.
Right.
And that's kind of the way Act Three is in your story when you're writing a novel. I've had clients who, when they get to Act Three, they want to stretch it out and start introducing new elements, and I go, no, 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 the readers and the viewers are expecting you to wrap this up really quickly, right? And that's what
Yeah.
Advent is. That's what we're doing at the end of this year. We're always kind of surprised when Advent and Christmas get here. We go, oh, it's here already. It seems like it was just here, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and so that's what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to kind of rely on the parable that Jesus told about the prodigal son, because I think that's a great kind of example. But before we jump into it, we were talking a little bit before we came on about cycles and how
Hmm.
we tend to think that we get to the end of something, but it seems to start over again. You want to share a little bit, not necessarily about your life, but how you've seen cycles work in just your own life?
Um, well, we talk about seasons in our, you know, church circles, our family circles. And um, I did hear one pastor say, you can't get into the new until you're all the way out of the old. And yet, and that's true as far as maybe ending the job to start a new job, whatever. But when we go into our new season or any new cycle, we take all that we went through in the past in with us. So,
So we're bringing the baggage with us, and that somehow,
well,
yeah,
I mean, the best part of what we learn, not necessarily baggage. I'm all for leaving the baggage,
yeah,
but taking all that we learn into our new season. So, I mean, we're not just literally starting over, but we're entering a new cycle, but having new knowledge of what we just learned through past experience, and then we'll be able to apply it in the new areas. So I would imagine it's like that for story writers. You finish the story, and yet you're going in, and there's still some ideas that are percolating from the old story.
right, right. So that's what I'm gonna kind of use as an example. I'm gonna kind of jump back to something we did with Act Three. And just as a quick recap, the way Act Three begins in your story is your character is thrust into a new world. Okay, now the new world may be going back to the original world that they were in, but it's in a different way because they've grown, or
Right.
they've changed, and things
Yeah.
have changed while we're gone. It's one of those deals where you can't go back to the home you grew up in and expect to find it the same. It's never the same, right? Even though it's the same location. So they're thrust into a new world, and they face their greatest fear. The one thing that he or she never hoped would happen. And that's a shift into direction. It's a transition. And any form of transportation will get them there. Um, and so here's the example that we use from a novel idea. And this is based on the story of the prodigal son. So you're familiar with the story. So this is a modern telling of that story. The scene opens with your lead stepping from the rig of an 18-wheeler. So this is when the son went back home. And that's called the transition. So he's stepping from the rig of an 18-wheeler. Walk to the cross. As the truck pulls away, your lead starts up a darkened road. Then you come to the win or lose scene. An expensive car speeds past. Moments later, brake lights flash. The car stops. Climax. The boy sees his father exiting the car. They make eye contact. His father reaches for the door handle as if to get back in the car, and then, grabbing his jacket from the front seat, the father runs to the young man. They hug. The father puts his coat on his son. That's the climax. Tie up loose ends, and this is what we're going to talk about today. The father tells his son to wash up. They're going to the club to celebrate, but the older son refuses to join them. Over dinner, the younger son is given a high position in his dad's company, while the older son sits home fuming, thus presenting the conflict for the sequel. And so before we came on, I told you this was going to be probably a really short episode today, because the way the sequels typically work, or should work, or I think they should work, at the end of your Act 3 story, is there is that hint of conflict, that unresolved next thing that's going to propel your character into the next book, the next follow-up to this. Hallmark movies don't do it as well, but TV shows certainly do. At the end of the season, there's always a cliffhanger. They're introducing new things that keep you driving to the next thing. But it happens with us in life as well. You know, we think we've tied up the loose ends. Benny's very fond of saying, you think you've raised the children until you realize that as a mom, there is no end to that.
Right. I testify to that.
So in your work, when you were looking at manuscripts and people brought you series, did you see any of this where they left things a little bit unresolved at the end and they carried it into the next series, and did they do it well or not well? Any experience?
Well, I often looked at debut authors' manuscripts, and so I ended up coaching them a little bit on the endings, because you definitely want to give your reader a satisfactory ending, but like you said, leave the reader wondering, okay, yay, they're together, but whoa, is it going to work? Knowing these characters and how quickly this came together, or she's starting this new dream job. Is it going to last, or is she going to, because we have this nagging sensation, it's not yet the perfect fit for her. There's something more for the character. And so that's what you want to do. You want to definitely, I get furious when I take the time, invest in reading, and I'm invested in these characters, and then we get to an ending that is just like a marketing ploy to make me buy the next book. That infuriates me. It's like no ending. They just leave you hanging. I mean, even on, say, NCIS, you know, with the cliffhanger to take you into the next season, they still solve the case. But there's some subplot going on that makes you like, leaves you like with this, oh, wow, you know, kind of thing. So I think it's really tricky for writers to do it well, Eddie. I think so. And because you got to satisfy your reader and yet then intrigue them, you know.
Yeah, so I'm going to lean on scripture for how one way we may do this. Because again, this is the season of Advent within the church, within the body. And the reason we call it that is because we know how everything ended 2,000 years ago, and we are in the age of grace, and we have lived that way for a long time, right? And yet, there is, or there should be, this time of the season, this looking forward to something that has yet to happen. Well, why are we looking forward? Where does that concept come from? And it comes from the fact that way back at the beginning of the stories, early on, there were these breadcrumbs of promises that
Yes,
something else was coming after this, right? So it wasn't
yes,
something we sprung on the reader at the end or the viewer at the last 5 minutes of the episode. No, no, no. These small breadcrumbs have been placed all along the path. And a lot of times we weren't even paying attention. But now, all this time later, we've put it together and go, oh, but there's something more to come. And we've been
oh, that's
anticipating
good.
this for 2,000 years.
Yes,
So that's what I would recommend to a writer is after you've finished your story, when you finally do get to the end, if you ever can get to the end, I have trouble finishing my stories, but if you can get to the end of a story and you feel like you've got it resolved and all, and you've tied up the loose ends and all that, look at how Jesus told the story of the prodigal son, and that hint early in the story that the older brother and the younger brother didn't get along. So that was a
right,
breadcrumb early in the story. Um, and then it comes back at the end of the story. And those two elements, even though they're very short, and it's not a very long story anyway, but that hints at the sequel, to what's to come. And from our perspective on a theological level, it's a dynamic that plays out over and over again because you've got the Pharisees, who were the Jews, who were the righteous older brother, who never broke a
hmm,
command, were always with the Father, doing exactly what the Father said to do,
right,
in, in theory,
in
and
theory.
in theory, and they hated the Gentiles,
Right,
which are the younger brother, right?
right. Oh, that's,
And
yeah,
and even now, we, the uh, younger brother, don't uphold the commands. We are constantly sinning, doing things we shouldn't. We are unclean, needing forgiveness all the time,
mm-hmm.
and yet we're in the dad's house, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's not just a metaphor; it's reality, and that plays out in the church itself because once we're saved, oftentimes the first thing we do is judge the person who has the sin that we have, right? So
yeah,
it's a cycle that goes. We were talking about cycle. It's a cycle that goes on and on. So I would just challenge you to look at your own life, look at your own attitudes as a writer, uh, and look at the way that your cycles are repeated over and over again, where the conflict is there. It's unresolved conflict,
mm-hmm.
perhaps, and how you continue to deal with this one issue or two issues over and over again, and how you can use that as a lesson to add the breadcrumbs to your story. After you've finished it, go back and add these breadcrumbs. And I think, well, I'll pause for a minute and give you a chance to comment.
No, I love that, um, that you said there was that breadcrumb even in the prodigal story. But I wouldn't have thought that you would add the breadcrumb after you've written the story. So I'm interested in you unpacking that a little bit. Um, why do you recommend doing it that way?
Well, for me, I don't know how the story is going to end until I get to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's true.
uh,
A lot,
you
and
know,
that's for a lot of writers, like from
yeah,
what they tell me. Yeah.
I'm working with a client right now, and he wants to plot the whole story to the very end, and that's admirable. But I keep telling him it really doesn't make any difference what happens, what you've got for Act Three, because by the time you write the story, it's going to change anyway. All these trying to put all these pencil marks on the wall and go that this picture is going to hang here. Wait till you get the house built and then decide where you're going to hang the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of my attitude. I have a general idea of where I want the story to begin and kind of where I think it's going to end, but I really don't know until I get to the end of the journey. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's one reason I use the plot formula, because it keeps me from getting lost in southern Utah out in a desert with no way back. At least I know how to get to California. In theory.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but once I get to the end of the story, then once I know that, then I can go back and go, the breadcrumbs would fit here, 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 and you're able to put it into the dialogue of a character. And so that's oftentimes what you're doing is you're putting it in dialogue. Um, And that for me, that's why I recommend adding it at the end. If you're smart, a level above me in your writing, then you may be able to add it as you're writing through.
Well, I had a question. I want to share an example of a writer, Krista Parrish. Now she's gone on to write many books, but her debut novel, I met Krista at the Philadelphia Christian Writers Conference, and she lives in Philly with her husband and children. But her first novel, I believe, if I'm thinking right, Waterbrook Multnomah published it, but it was not your typical CBA, Christian Book Association novel. But in the ending of it, we read it in our book club up in Pittsburgh, and Joyce, my boss, Joyce Hart of Heartline, she hated it because it ended so differently. And everybody else loved it because it didn't tie everything up in a sweet bow. And the tactic she used was she left the ending in the reader. The reader could decide kind of what they thought, how it would end, but she didn't tell you. But she left the main character in a very healthy place where the person was, had gone through a lot of trauma and everything. So she finally is at a place where she's starting to believe that God loves her. And then she steps off the stage. Mm. And I really loved it because I, of course, saw the trajectory of her having a really good life as she figured things out with God, because we know God's faithful. He'll stick close, and he'll see her through. And she now acknowledged that God was for her, and loved her. So I love that ending. Now, her consecutive novels, I think she bent to the publisher a little bit and then wrapped them up a little more market-driven type of endings. But she's an incredible writer. Her novels are really fabulous and pull out the character. She's a character-driven writer. But I really like that, do you remember the movie Clue? Mm-mm. The modern day movie Clue. They actually offer free endings.
Yeah. I think to Joyce's reaction hers was probably like mine. For those of us who are absolutely so sure of everything, and I'm speaking tongue in cheek, right? If you don't type everything correctly, then we go, you haven't done it right. Well, that's because we're so smart in theory, right? This is us. We're smart. We know everything. The rest of the world understands that we don't know everything, right? And so I think it resonates with people like that, with people that, are humble enough to recognize that we don't know it all. I'm not saying Joyce does, but I'm saying from her convictions and my convictions, that's where you're going to come.
Well, but we realize life is an ongoing story, Yeah. So that was kind of how she left it, but I remember it being one of my favorites. And all her readers were like, okay, when's the sequel coming out? She says, I'm not writing one. And she never wrote one. She never wrote one. It would have been really short and it would have been boring.
Probably.
She gave all the good stuff. So
yeah.
Anyway, sorry. I don't know if that was, but that ending, I liked it. And it was satisfactory. It left the reader with a really warm, good feeling, hope, for the person, for the main character.
I think that's a great way to end this episode, because it kind of ties back to the concept of Advent, because again, we're looking forward, to Jesus coming again. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? And good gracious, nobody can agree on how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. For 2,000 years, we've been arguing about what does all these prophecies mean, and all their books are out there. There's a whole industry behind this. So you're right. Leaving it open-ended creates great discussion.
but with lots of hope, right?
With lots of hope. That's right.
We
That is,
know however it ends, it's going to be good.
yeah, it is going to be good. That's right. Well, listen, I know you're traveling soon, so drive safe, and hopefully next
Okay.
week we can get you back from the beach and
Yep.
enjoy your time away. And to the audience out there, to the listeners and the readers, again, think about your story. When you tie it all up in the tight little tiny bow at the end, make sure you've gone back and added the breadcrumbs. You've gone
Yeah.
back and a little bit of conflict so that a next character can come out and start a new story, because there are always new stories within us.
Excellent.
All right.
Have a
Thanks.
great week, everybody.
See ya.
Bye-bye.